Hey, what's up guys, Nuts here. So for today's video we're going to be talking about aperture. So if you're just starting photography and don't know what this is the video for you. Let's go. Now when we talk about what makes your exposure, which is your photo, there's three items that you need to know about. One is the shutter speed, second is the ISO, and the third is the aperture, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. I think aperture is probably the most difficult one that people tend to struggle on grasping. So we're going to tackle that one first in this video, and then we'll do the other ones in another video. So let's think of aperture as your eye. Will close depending on if there's a lot of light, or if it's really dark, the aperture, in this case, the little circle of the eye will open. Think of that as aperture. Same thing on the camera. It's basically the same thing, which is the center of the lens, which is what lets the lights into the lens.
Okay, now that you know what this means, in the case of the camera world, the way that this is measured is by a formula which gives out your f-stop, which is pretty easy, don't worry. But just to be able to get the complicated definition out of the way, this is what it means.
In optics, the f number is an optical system such as a camera lens is the ratio to the system's focal length to the diameter of the entrance pupil. It is also known as focal ratio, f ratio, or f-stop. Sounds complicated, right? But don't worry, it's actually pretty simple. So let's say, for example, you have a 50mm lens, and the front part, which is the iris, which is open to, let's say, 25mm. You divide the 50 by 25, gives you 2, which means that your lens is at f2. Simple as that. Now, in relation to the human eye is actually an f8.3, usually in full-blown daylight, and usually 2.2 in darker situations.
So one of the cool things of actually being able to adjust the aperture is it provides us the ability to do some of those really cool shots that we see. And probably the most common one is the one that we have the person in focus in the front, and then we got the really cool blurry background. That is actually adjusting what is called the depth of field.
Depth of field is the distance between the closest and the farthest object of what is in focus, which means that if we use a really tight f-stop like f1.4, that depth of field is really small, which gives that really cool background effect. Now when the depth of field is really wide or really big, you basically get a lot of stuff in focus.
And the cool thing of that is we can actually adjust that with our cameras with the aperture setting. For example, let's say you're taking a portrait shot and you want only the eye and the person sideways, and you want the eye in focus. And now you'll notice that you can actually put the front of the face, this side, out of focus, as well as the back out of focus. And by adjusting the aperture, we can make what's in focus bigger or smaller, which is really cool. Now the perfect example for this, we're actually going to head over to Pandora and we're going to shoot some items, and one of them is going to be one of the flowers, and we're going to start taking the photo at f1.4, which is the widest that I have on my lens, and we're going to slowly increase that number, and you're going to see how what is in focus in front stays in focus, but what's in the back starts to come into focus little by little. Check it out. Now, something that you probably didn't notice, and I did put the comments there on the left, is that as we start adjusting that, you'll see that the shutter speed starts going down. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, all three things are connected, which is the shutter speed, the ISO, and the aperture. So when we start adjusting one, the camera is going to automatically adjust the other ones. And what's happening here, as we start making our aperture smaller, which means that there's less light coming in at one time, the camera has to adjust the shutter speed so it can let in more light with the less time that it has, which is why the shutter speed will start going slower. And you'll notice this really a lot when it comes to doing night photography, that if you start adjusting your f-stop, you'll see how the time starts going up, meaning that it's going to take longer for the exposure to happen.
Now you're probably wondering, how do I know what is the f-stop that my lens allows? Well, actually it's right on the lens. Let me show you.
Here is a stock lens that I bought with my camera. And this is basically a zoom lens that comes with it, which is 75 to 300, so you can zoom all the way to 300. And you'll see that the number actually is right here on the lens. You see where it says 4 and then dash 5.6. Now what that means, that at the closest range, which is 75, it's going to be f4. But as soon as I start zooming in, you know, going into all the way up to 300, it's going to adjust its aperture all the way to 5.6, which is normal in these lenses. For example, here is my Sigma lens, which I talk about all the time, which is my Sigma f2.8. And as you can see here on the front of the lens, you'll see where it says that it's 2.8. There's not a second number. And what that means is I can zoom in throughout the lens, and it actually can do 2.8 through the whole way. Does not mean I cannot adjust it to something else. I can always put it as 5.6 or whatever, but it does have the ability to do f2.8 all the way through the zoom range that the lens provides. And that, again, like I said, is one of the reasons why lenses cost what they cost.
Now there's two ways to adjust the aperture on your camera. There's actually two modes that we could set it to. One is the manual one, which I don't recommend yet, and the other one is the aperture priority, which is AV on the Canon cameras. And that way, when you hit the dial, you'll actually see that the aperture will go up and down depending on the lens that you have, is depending the minimum number and the highest number that you'll find on them.
Now we've spoken all about apertures and all that fun stuff. You're probably wondering what is that I use for some of my photos, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you. Now when it comes to dark rides, portraits, or stuff that I want to really focus in on a certain thing, I'll probably use my widest f-stop, 1.8 or 1.4 or whatever you have. Now we're looking at something like dark shots, for landscapes or walking around the parks where I do night photography. Then I'll usually start at 5.6. Stuff which is related to like fireworks, I'll usually do f11, and there's actually a link here for how I shoot fireworks, a video that I did a while back. I usually don't recommend going all the way to the extreme on the other side, like f22 and stuff like that, because usually with an f16 or f11 you'll do fine.
Okay guys, so that's it here from Animal Kingdom. Hopefully it explains what is aperture on the camera, and hopefully you can use it for your Disney photography. Now if you got any questions, feel free to ask right there below on the comments, and I'll gladly respond to them. So if this is the first time watching these videos, my name is Disney Nuts, and along with my wife we do food reviews and other bunch of fun stuff, as well as these photography videos. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more of these videos flowing. So until then guys, stay awesome. See ya. Bye. That's awesome.